Welcome back to Only Talk Sports, where we talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Roach Jeffrey. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. The transfer portal is starting to go absolutely crazy. We still got the Final Four in the national championship to look forward to, but the transfer portal is wanting to steal the spotlight, with a lot of players already announcing where they are going to be playing basketball next season. I usually do singular videos for players when they announce their next destination, but there's been so much news today that I just felt like making a first transfer portal update. If there's tons of news in the future on a given day, I probably will do more transfer portal update videos like this. But we got a lot to get into with players going to new schools, players possibly entering the portal, and so much more. So let's get into it. The first player we got to talk about with the transfer portal and a commitment is the South Dakota State transfer portal guard Zeke Mayo has committed to the Kansas Jayhawks. This is massive news for Bill Self because he needs backcourt scorers, he needs three-point shooters, and Zeke Mayo checks all the boxes. He's a 6'4" guard, and he averaged 19 points per game, 6 rebounds, and 4 assists this past season. At South Dakota State, he shot 39% from 3, and he was the Summit League Player of the Year. Now, obviously, Kansas did bring in Nicholas Timberlake from Towson in the last offseason, and he was expected to be a guy that contributed a whole lot more this season, and he didn't really translate his success over from Towson to Kansas. His production took a massive dip, but I think Zeke Mayo's game is a little bit more translatable to the Big 12. His scoring is definitely going to take a dip. There's no way he's going to average 19 points per game next season at Kansas, but I do believe still it's a fantastic addition for Bill Self because Kansas needs more three-point shooting. He's still going to be a guy that I believe can shoot 35% at least from the three-point line, and if he can average about 8 to 10 points per game, then I believe Kansas is looking pretty solid for next season. Now, this is what somebody tweeted out. They said, as of right now, with nobody having departed, Kansas has all 12 scholarships filled out of 12, which that's actually inaccurate because you do have 13 scholarships, so Kansas still has another roster spot available. But looking at Kansas' scholarship chart, you've got DeJuan Harris, Hunter Dickinson, KJ Adams, who just announced that he's coming back to Kansas. That's a smart move. He's not ready for the NBA, and I don't really think entering the transfer portal would benefit him all that much. There's not going to be a lot of other schools that would offer him more NIL than Kansas is giving him. Johnny Furphy, him and Hunter Dickinson, those are the two guys that we don't know what they're going to do. I think Furphy should test the NBA draft waters, especially since it's a slightly weak NBA draft, but we'll have to see. Elmarco Jackson, Jamari McDowell, Zach Clements, Riley Kugel, who I just made a video on the other day announcing that he was transferring from Florida to Kansas. I think he could help in the backcourt, especially as a driver. Then you got Zeke Mayo now, Raquise Passmore, and then you got Flory Badunga and LeBaron Fallon. And I feel like for Kansas, it would almost benefit them if some of these guys on the bench would transfer out, like Zach Clements, Jamari McDowell as well. If two of those guys leave and then Kansas possibly loses Johnny Furphy to the draft, then they'll probably need 3 or 4 more guys through the transfer portal. So Bill Self's definitely not done. I don't see this roster being finished for the Kansas Jayhawks, but regardless, Zeke Mayo's a massive addition. It shows Kansas is already getting on the ground running. People were worried when they got the Riley Kugel addition because he's not a great three-point shooter. He's a better driver, but Zeke Mayo, he's a better shooter, and I believe that his production is going to translate better from a smaller school to a bigger school than Nicholas Timberlake did this past season for Kansas. So all in all, a good addition for Kansas, especially if he's able to translate his success. Another transfer portal addition that we have to talk about is Eddie Lampkin, the center for the Colorado Buffaloes, is transferring to the Syracuse Orange. Now, this was not a transfer addition that I was expecting to occur. I thought that Eddie Lampkin would be a guy that would stay at Colorado. He's not a guy that's going to go off to the NBA. He's not ready for that. He only has 1 season left of college basketball. He still has a lot to improve on if he's going to have any shot at the NBA. I don't really think he will, though, because he's just such an old school big. But Colorado, I know they spent a lot of their NIL money on their football team with Deion Sanders, and maybe they don't have enough of it left when it comes to college basketball. Plus, we don't know if Cody Williams and KJ Simpson, 2 of the best players for Colorado, are going to leave for the NBA. If those guys do leave, then Colorado's team could be significantly worse, which is maybe why Eddie Lampkin decided to transfer to Syracuse. The only problem is that Syracuse is not a team that's doing all that great right now. They're okay. Adrian Autry's trying to get Syracuse back to being a tournament team after the retirement of Jim Boeheim, but I do believe that Syracuse is a program that is somewhat struggling, but maybe Eddie Lampkin can fix it. There was an article talking about this addition position for Syracuse and saying that Syracuse desperately needed a center, and that's true. Jesse Edwards, after he left Syracuse for West Virginia, that left a massive hole in the middle for the Orange. They actually had some solid guard play with Judah Mintz in the backcourt, but I don't think they were able to compete with a lot of the better teams in the ACC this past season because they just didn't have a guy in the middle. But Eddie Lampkin's going to fix that problem. They definitely needed a center, and he averaged 11 points per game this past season for Colorado, which was by far his best season in college basketball. And the only thing is that he would have been the starting center next year for Colorado, so it doesn't make too much sense, but maybe he feels that Syracuse will be able to help him win more, and maybe he's getting a little bit more NIL than Colorado. So overall, I guess it makes sense for Eddie Lampkin, but kind of an interesting transfer move overall. And the last big transfer portal addition we have to talk about before we start talking about guys that have entered the portal or could be entering the portal at the end of this video, we got Meechie Johnson transferring back to Ohio State. And this is when you know that the portal is getting absolutely crazy. When guys transfer out of a program and go to another school, and then they end up going back to the original school that they transferred from a couple years later. Now, obviously, Meechie Johnson, it kind of makes sense the more you deep dive into it because of the fact that he transferred out of Ohio State because he was not getting a lot of playing time when Chris Holtmann was the head coach. In his first 2 seasons when he was in college basketball at Ohio State, he averaged 1 point per game his first season and then 4 points per game as a sophomore. So he transferred out to go to South Carolina, and he instantly improved. He got a lot more playing time, which was the biggest issue for Meechie Johnson and for a lot of players in college basketball. You just need playing time, and that was the original intent of the transfer portal, was that if you're not getting playing time, you got to transfer to another program where you're going to get playing time. Now the transfer portal has just become a crazy mess where NIL is a factor. Maybe you're not happy with the coach. There's a lot of factors at play instead of it just being about playing time. But Meechie Johnson transferring to South Carolina was definitely about playing time. But he did really good this past season, improving to 14 points per game as a senior, and he was able to lead South Carolina to the NCAA tournament. The Gamecocks had a great season. So it's a massive loss for Lamont Paris and South Carolina because now they're going to have to try to find a guard that can even somewhat replace what Meechie Johnson did. Meechie Johnson isn't a perfect player. He's not a great three-point shooter, but still, he is a pretty good passer overall. Needs to improve at that, and he's a good free throw shooter, and at times can be a bucket getter. So it's massive for Ohio State because they did lose Scotty Middleton, one of the younger guards on their team that had some potential. So Meechie Johnson will definitely be able to help the backcourt for the Buckeyes next season. And I believe the main reason why he transferred back to the Buckeyes is because Jake Diebler is now the head coach for Ohio State, and Jake Diebler was an assistant coach at Ohio State when Meechie Johnson was a player for the Buckeyes a couple years ago. So maybe he really liked Jake Diebler as an assistant coach, and he believes that Diebler is the best coach for him in his final season of college basketball because it will be Meechie Johnson's last year with the extra year that he's being given like all the other college basketball players with the pandemic. So it's big for Ohio State and Jake Diebler, but that's definitely the reason Meechie Johnson transferred back. It's the familiarity, and probably Ohio State's giving him a good NIL deal as well. And the Buckeyes possibly could be an NCAA tournament team next season with the new head coach in town. But now we got some other news to talk about after the 3 big transfer portal additions that have been announced today. A big news story that's been going around all day today is whether Bronny James is transferring from the USC Trojans. It looked like a few hours ago that it was a done deal, that Bronny James was leaving USC. Now people are talking to LeBron after his NBA game tonight, and he's saying that it's up to Bronny James, that no decision's been made. So there's always going to be drama when it comes to LeBron James and his son, and I think that's just the biggest problem for LeBron James' son, because Bronny James is a player that was always overrated. And I know some people aren't going to like what I have to say, but it's absolutely true. Bronny James is a player that if he was not LeBron James' son, he would not have been a 5-star recruit or even close to being a 4-star recruit. He might have been a high 3-star, maybe low 4-star player. He has some game. He's not a bad player. He can drive some, he can shoot a little bit, but he doesn't really have any major strengths. He's not even a terrible defender overall, but he does have some weaknesses there as well. He just doesn't really do anything all that great. And Bronny James was always being propped up being LeBron James' son, and that's what's really hurt him. Plus, he had the cardiac arrest, and I really hate that for Bronny James. I believe that the cardiac arrest problem that he had a while back probably hurt his development in college basketball. I really think it did. If he didn't have that problem, maybe he would have had a better freshman season. But still, I think the limelight's a major problem for Bronny James. Maybe it would be good for him to leave, especially with Andy Enfield, the USC coach, leaving for SMU. Maybe that's where he goes. Maybe he goes somewhere else. But it probably would be good for him to leave leave USC. We don't know if he is right now, but he's definitely not ready for the NBA. And Bronny James, I think he's a guy that could improve in college basketball. He's going to get an NBA shot regardless because his dad is LeBron. But I think that's the biggest thing holding Bronny James back overall is that he's LeBron James' son, and he just can't meet the expectations that he has being LeBron James' son. And a lot of people thinking that he was going to be a stud in college basketball since he was bumped up to a five-star recruit. He's just not that good. He's a good player, but he's not a five-star recruit. He's not a top-level player in college basketball, and he just needs to go to a program where the limelight can possibly be off of him a little bit, which it probably won't because people are still going to talk about him no matter what, but he just needs to go maybe to SMU or some other program and just get his footing back in college basketball and maybe become a player that can be a fringe NBA prospect in the future and have some success. But we'll have to see with Bronny James. That's a developing story, but when he does transfer to another program, I definitely will be covering it. And now with some other portal news, all of these are players that have entered the portal but haven't announced where they're going yet. Some Florida Atlantic players are leaving, including John L. Davis, which makes sense since Dusty May left for the Michigan job. Maybe they will follow him there. Then you got Kirk Kriisa transferring from West Virginia. He did not play as well at West Virginia than he did at Arizona, so a new change of scenery would be good for him. You also got Glenn Taylor Jr. leaving St. John. So all these players, we have no idea where they're going to go, but they have just entered. Tyler Johnson is transferring from Louisville. He's a freshman guy that's got some talent, so we'll have to see where he ends up deciding to go. I know AJ Storr's in the portal as well, and it looks like he's going to Illinois. He had a great season at Wisconsin this past year, played well at St. John's as a freshman, so that's going to be a big name to watch. You also have Jamarquez Lawrence transferring from Nebraska. That's a very tough loss for Fred Hoiberg because he had a good season this past year in Lincoln. Jamie Kaiser's leaving Maryland. He has potential as a freshman. Dane Danger's leaving Illinois. That's a guy that can help out in other programs, especially in the Big Ten if he goes to another Big Ten school, since the Big Ten still plays with a lot of back-to-the-basket big men. But there's a lot of guys that have just entered the portal, and they're going to be announcing their location in the coming days, and we'll be here to cover it as well as we possibly can, whether in singular transfer portal videos or in these massive portal update videos. But it's been a big day of transfer portal news in college basketball. Zeke Mayo going to Kansas is huge. Eddie Lampkin to Syracuse, and Meechie Johnson going back to Ohio State. I think all three transfer portal additions have some promise, with Zeke Mayo going to Kansas being the biggest one because the Jayhawks desperately needed a shooter, and now Bill Self's got to work out the rest of his roster to possibly help the Jayhawks be a successful team next season and be back to where they want to be in college basketball. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens in the coming days in the transfer portal, and I can't wait to find out where these players are going to be transferring to amid all this portal craziness. But let me know what you guys think in the comment section down below about these players transferring to these new schools, and which transfer portal edition you think is the most important out of these three, and of the players that have entered the portal but haven't committed to other schools yet, where you think they possibly are going to go, and what you think about the Bronny James news, and whether you think he should transfer and possibly get out of the limelight a little bit more, or whether you think he will stay at USC. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below. Follow me on Twitter as well. Link is in the description, and I'll see you next time.